One morning, a fisherman named Syracuse goes out to fish in the waters near an island. When he reels his net back onto the deck, he is shocked to see an unconscious woman caught in it. When people say there are many fish in the sea, this probably isn't what they mean. Quickly, Syracuse runs to his radio to call for help, but receives no response. Luckily, the woman stirs, scratching her hand, and he is relieved that she is alive. He performs CPR, and she regains full consciousness. Confused, she looks around and asks Syracuse if she is alive. He explains how he found her in his net. He then takes her inside the cabin and offers to take her to the hospital, but she refuses. Just then, another boat approaches, and the woman hides on the floor. Seeing her reaction, Syracuse asks her questions about herself, but she claims she doesn't remember. Since she seems stranded, he decides to let her stay at his late mother's house. There he offers her a sandwich for breakfast before leaving. Moments later, he arrives at his ex-wife Maura's house to pick up his daughter for her hospital appointment. His daughter Annie is suffering from kidney failure, requiring regular dialysis, and uses a wheelchair to get around. At the hospital, as the nurse starts the dialysis process, Annie asks Syracuse to tell her a story. He tells her about the fisherman who caught a strange woman in his net. Annie suggests the woman might be a selkie, and explains that a selkie is a creature that loses its coat and is stuck on land until it finds it. Hours later, when dialysis is complete, Syracuse drops Annie back at Maura's house. Before he leaves, Maura tells him the doctor said Annie needs a new kidney. A few moments later, he visits the woman at his mother's house and hears her singing an unknown song. When she learns he is going fishing, she asks to join him. He hesitates but eventually agrees. While fishing, he asks if she remembers her name, and she says he can call her Ondine, which she claims means from the water. Seconds after, he reels in some nets, but they're empty. Ondine begins singing the unknown song and he continues fishing. At that moment, a lot of fish swim towards her voice and get trapped in the nets underwater, but they don't see this. Syracuse reels in a full net and suspects Ondine's song attracted them. He throws the net back in, asking her to sing again, and the same thing happens. He tells Ondine that she brings him luck. But when he invites her to come with him to sell the fish in town, she insists she doesn't want to meet anyone. Later that day, Syracuse picks Annie at her school. Annie says she wants to race him with her wheelchair, so he gets into his car and drives at her pace while she rides close to him. On the way, she asks about the woman in his story, and he tells her that the woman's song helps the fisherman catch fish. Annie suggests the woman is using the song to communicate with the fish. When they arrive at Maura's house, Syracuse drives off, thinking Annie has gone inside. Unknown to him, Annie follows him, suspecting he is the fisherman in the story. A short while later, he arrives at his mother's house with clothes and groceries for Ondine. To thank him, she kisses him on the cheek. A perfect time to say love is in the air. But this is a water story, right? Syracuse tells her that she can stay as long as she wants. Meanwhile, Annie listens to their conversation. That same day, Annie goes to a bookstore to purchase books about selkies. Her father, on the other hand, goes to a church to confess his sins to a reverend. He tells the reverend that he stole a dress from the clothing store because of a woman he found in his net. The reverend's facial expression proves that God may not have a sense of humor. Before Syracuse leaves, the reverend asks him to give regular updates about the woman. Later that night, Annie reads the books about selkies. Her stepfather, Maura's husband, notices, but she claims they're for school. Determined to learn more, Annie returns to the house the next morning and finds Ondine swimming by the shore. Annie reveals that her father told her about a woman he rescued from the sea. Ondine realizes Annie is Syracuse's daughter, and they introduce themselves. As they walk toward the house, Annie explains that she has been reading about selkies and asks Ondine if she has her seal coat. Ondine is surprised and asks Annie to explain more. Annie says Ondine will remain trapped on land until she finds her seal coat, and if Ondine buries it, Ondine can stay on land for 7 years. Meanwhile, Syracuse visits the same bookstore looking for selkie books, only to learn that Annie borrowed them for a school project. Later that day, a strange man arrives on the island, searching for someone. The next morning, Syracuse and Ondine go fishing again, and he teaches her to drive the boat. Ondine starts singing, and the fishes follow the sound of her voice. After a few seconds, Syracuse reels in the net and sees a great catch. Suddenly, he hears the sound of another boat approaching and groans in frustration. He tells her that the men from the fisheries board will come on the boat for inspection, so Ondine hides. When the men board the boat, they ask him how he caught a lot of fish and start inspecting the boat. They find Ondine hiding under a pile of net. Since it isn't illegal to have a woman on the boat, they leave. As soon as they leave, Ondine worries they'll talk about her, but she agrees to go into town with Syracuse for the first time. When they get to town, everyone stares at Ondine because she is new. There, they meet Annie and she says that she knew Ondine was real. Later that day, when they return to the island, Annie follows Ondine to the house, but Syracuse doesn't know about this. They spend time swimming and playing in the water. Suddenly, Ondine feels something strange in the water and carries Annie to the small boat. Then she dives back into the water and comes up with a strange coat made of leaves. Annie realizes that it is the seal coat and asks if Ondine will bury it so she can stay for 7 years on land. So they decide to bury it together and keep it a secret. Later that day, Syracuse, Ondine, and Annie sail together. Annie asks about Ondine's Selkie husband, but Ondine denies having one. Annie insists she has simply forgotten him. When they get to town, Annie decides to test Ondine's powers. She drives her wheelchair at a high speed and falls into the water. Quickly, Ondine dives in to rescue her. Meanwhile, the strange man walks around town, still searching for something unknown. That evening, when Annie gets back home, Mora asks her about the incident in the Selkie woman. Mora says that a strange man came to their house asking about the Selkie woman. Back at his mother's house, Syracuse tells Ondine why he and Mora broke up. They were both alcoholics and he decided to quit for Annie's sake, but Mora refused and left him. However, he didn't get custody of Annie because of the law in the town. As they talk, they face each other and Syracuse kisses her. He spends the night fishing in the sweet waters of her body. The next time Syracuse meets the Reverend, he confesses to sleeping with Ondine. He says that she brings him luck, but he is afraid something bad will happen. At the end of their session, the strange man meets Syracuse outside the church and asks for Ondine's name, but Syracuse doesn't respond. He drives to Mora's house to pick up Annie for her next dialysis session, leaving Ondine alone at the house. The strange man discovers Ondine's location and drives there to look for her. Luckily, she senses his presence and recognizes that he is her Selkie husband, so hides before he gets into the house. When the dialysis is over, it is already night. Mora is at a club drinking and playing games. When Syracuse finds Mora there, he is hesitant to leave Annie with her, but Annie assures him that she will be fine. By the time he arrives at his mother's house, he finds the place scattered and Ondine is missing. After searching for a while, he finds her hiding under a cave around the house. She tells him that her Selkie husband has come for her. He responds by telling her to wish her husband away with her powers. But when she makes a wish, she says that she wants Annie to be healed. After a short while, he drives her to town because she can't go back to the house. At the same time, Mora is driving back home in the car with her husband and Annie. Since she is drunk, she collides with another vehicle on the road, resulting in a fatal accident that claims her husband's life instantly. As first responders arrive on the scene, Syracuse notices the accident from afar and goes to investigate. He is shocked to see that Annie has been involved in an accident. Meanwhile, Ondine gets scared when she notices that the victim in the other car is her Selkie husband. Luckily, when they get to the hospital, the doctor tells Syracuse that someone has donated kidneys to Annie, so they start the kidney transplant as part of her treatment. When the strange man is wheeled in, he sees Ondine and calls out to her. Since he isn't badly injured, they meet at a corner in the hospital. She tells him to return without her, but he says that he has to wait for the police to question him about the accident. A few days later, when Mora recovers, she asks Syracuse to take Annie to his house while she mourns her husband. On the night of the funeral, Syracuse gets drunk and goes to meet Ondine, who is now living in the dock of his boat. When she tells him that her Selkie husband is still looking for her, he gets angry and says he will take her home. Out of anger, he drives her to the foot of a lighthouse and dumps her there. He says that humans and Selkies don't belong together. When Annie recovers and is discharged, she asks about Ondine, and Syracuse tells her that Ondine has left. Annie says that Ondine will return because she left something behind, but she refuses to say what it is. Days go by and Syracuse tries to live without Ondine. However, he is haunted by her song. So one day he returns to the lighthouse to look for her, and finds her lying on a rock, shivering. She asks him to take her back home, but before they leave, he asks Ondine to tell him the truth about herself. She confesses that she is a prisoner who was forced to move illegal drugs with her handler, Vladik. When the Coast Guard caught them at sea, Vladek forced her to jump into the water with the drugs and swim. He didn't know how to swim. Since she was a good swimmer, she got far away from him, but eventually got tired. It was at that moment, when she was drowning, that she got caught in the fishing net. She tells him her real name is Joanna. After hearing her story, Syracuse takes her back to his house. Upon their arrival, they find Vladek, who is also her Selkie husband, in the living room, and Annie has been taken hostage. Without hesitating, Syracuse hits him in the face and they get into a fight. Unfortunately, Vladek has backup, and an accomplice holds Ondine and Syracuse at gunpoint. Vladek asks Ondine where she kept the drugs. Annie tells them the story about the seal coat, and they demand to see it. So Ondine leads them to the place where the seal coat is buried. But when she digs the ground, the seal coat isn't there. Turning to Annie, Ondine begs Annie to tell her where she moved the seal coat, and promises she will stay with her forever. Annie tells them that she hid it in the lobster pot on the boat. When they reach the boat, Vladek and his accomplice focus on retrieving the lobster pot using a rope. Seizing the opportunity, Ondine pulls hard on the rope, causing one man to fall into the water, while Syracuse throws the other overboard. Since neither man can swim, both Vladek and his accomplice drown. Unfortunately, Ondine is arrested. Days later, Syracuse meets with the Reverend and tells him that Ondine will be deported unless she becomes a national or gets married to one. He says he is going to marry Ondine. A week later, Syracuse and Ondine get married and live happily ever after. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like our channel and subscribe if you enjoy content like this. Also, let us know what movie you would love us to recap for you. Tell us the strangest mermaid experience you've had. Yeah.